Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Kizer Knives Elektro and Kempa VK1. I'm just going to go ahead and call it the VK1, but nonetheless, interesting piece, and yeah, looking forward to checking it out. But first off, before we go any further, I got to let you know this guy was sent to me by Kizer Knives. Actually, what happened is the designer reached out to me first, said, "Hey Nick, you want to check one out?" I said, "Absolutely," but as always, I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. It might be a gem, it might be junk. They still did send it along. We do have to assume, though, this is the very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. This is actually not a particularly small knife, although it kind of can look like it. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2 and your Spyderco Delica. So what we see here is, yeah, this is of reasonable size here. Next up, we'll put it up against the Ontario Rat number 2. And again, this is a reasonably sized knife. And then I'll do a little bit of measurement for you. What we're going to see is this guy comes in right over the 3.25-inch line. Maybe if the cop really likes you, they'll get it at 3.25. But it's just right over that line. So there is that. Next thing, who is this guy? Well, Kizer is a company based out of China. They have done a lot of interesting stuff in the past. And this is a design by Elektro and Kempa, also known as Vulpex Knives, I think. The Vulpex is the main, person who does it with the cute little fox logo on there. Well, I assume it's a Vulpix, just a young one. But nonetheless, this is a, yes, that's a Pokemon reference for those of you unfamiliar. Anyways, yeah, that's what we got going on here. So let's go ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting little knife right here. First off, on the good side, I gotta say, I'm liking the clip on this guy. And the reason I say that is that it is pretty well done here. We see it's got some nice contouring to it. It is internally screwed, which I gotta appreciate. We see we've got a little bit of cutouts here to just give myself a little flex. We got a nice ramp to get into the pocket, and it is reasonably long. A long clip can actually be a nice thing. It's not the deepest carry thing ever, but at the same time, it's a nice clip, and it works generally pretty well, so that's good. Next thing, blade on this guy. This is a nice blade. It has a reasonably nice grind. It comes down to a relatively thin edge right there, which I appreciate. It is a Warncliffe style blade with a relatively flat bottom to it. I'll go ahead and I'll set this guy up against the ruler, and what you're going to see here is it is not actually flat, right? But it has that sort of overall impression. If I can do all of this while remaining intact with, in connection with the bottom of the edge there. This is not strictly a Warnie, but it definitely feels like a Warncliffe blade, so, there is that. And the steel on this guy is, I think it's marked on here. Yep, there it is. S35VN, and S35VN is a great all-around this sort of blade steel. No real objection to that. So, there you go. Next thing, this guy has some contouring to it. What you're going to see as you look at this is that it is not just the case that it is it's not just flat titanium. Instead, we have some titanium here, but there is a little bit of a rounding to it. There is an overall contour, and in fact, you see all the little bit of metal kind of drilled out around it. That's good. You see a little bit of contouring right around the pivot here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. I can't argue with that. So, the contouring on this guy actually does look quite good, and it makes it feel a little bit more luxurious than I think it would have felt otherwise. And so I do appreciate that. Next thing, the look on this guy is pretty neat, right? What we have here is sort of, and it's hard to tell exactly how to orient the knife, whether it's a swept back tip or a swept back handle or something. But anyways, the knife has it's sort of a weird mix of like Koenig Mini Goblin, which is a Barajas design, the Spidey Chef, which is Marcin Swish, and then a little bit of Elijah Isham, maybe thrown in, some Bose blades. I don't know. Either way, it is a very unusual design, and it's pretty neat. I don't think it's any one of those things enough to feel that derivative, but at the same time, it's got its own little thing. So I appreciate that, and this looks different than the dime a dozen sorts of knives you will often see released, and so that's good. Next thing, the action on this guy is fine. It has a pretty reliable opening action. Once you get used to the flipper tab, and we'll talk about that in a second here, but once you get used to the flipper tab, everything works pretty well. And then on the closed side, it's quite smooth. It has a nice smooth action to it, and yeah, so action-wise, there's not a whole lot to object to here. Then finally, on the good side, the price on this guy is $179, and yeah, that's good. I'll take it. That'll do. And the thing is, because this is a titanium frame lock, an S35 VN steel, this feels like a reasonable value, right? Would I want it to be a little bit higher end than some of the materials? Sure, why not? But the thing is, it is nice to see Kizer continuing to push value, even as some of the other Chinese brands, looking at like Wei, Rayot, Civivi, are really kind of moving themselves out of value country and quickly becoming just too damn expensive. So I like seeing somebody who's doing a little bit more in the way of value here at this world. So to me, all that is the good. $179. It's got a fine action. It's a neat look, some good contouring to it, a nice blade, and a nice clip. On the great side to me is actually the flipper tab design, or maybe the lack thereof. Not 100% sure, but what we see here is that the bottom of the blade is sticking out here. And the way to open this knife, this will not work with a conventional kind of push-button style. No. What you have to do is you just press it backwards. You pull back, and then the knife fires out. And you can see the flipper tab ends up sitting right here. So as a result of this, there is nothing, when the knife is closed, there is no pocket pecker. There's nothing sitting in there. What's a good example of that? Right here. This is the Artisan Cutlery Arroyo, and what we see here is this guy is going to be constantly pecking on whatever's in your pocket, whereas this guy just has a smooth contour at the very bottom here. By the way, this looks very close from a distance, but it's not close enough to be able to cut you in there, which is nice. Anyways, so there's nothing really, this hangs very flat in the pocket, and it's very smooth, there's no complaint there. And then when the knife is open, there's no flipper tab sticking down, which is, preventing you from, choking up a little bit. So you can get all the way up onto this top part if you want to, as you're gripping it. And so, is it the most comfy thing ever to use? Not necessarily. But the thing is, this is sort of optimized for both carry in this configuration and for cutting in this configuration. Maybe not as much for opening, but it still works pretty well. I don't mind that at all, and I think it's really nice to see somebody playing around with flipper tab designs that don't have some of the downsides of a conventional flipper. So to me, that's what's great. Its hidden flipper tab design is just, it works well. On the bad side, to start with, I gotta say, the lanyard hole on this guy, the rest of the knife feels very designed. This lanyard hole just feels like, guys, you don't need to put a lanyard hole. If it's not going to be interesting, don't do it. Or like build it into the backspace or something like that. I just don't care for these kinds of lazy lanyard holes. The whole knife could have been a little bit smaller, and we just skipped that whole affair. Next thing, this is not a super lightweight knife. I'll go ahead and I'll throw this guy on a scale here. What we're going to see, coming in around 3.76 ounces for about 3¼ inch knife. Not the end of the world, but it's certainly not super light, and it's also relatively thick as well. If I put this guy up next to the PM2, which is also a knife of considerable girth, what we're going to see here is that this guy is definitely thicker than that PM2. We see both the screws sticking out, the titanium generally speaking. This is a thick boy right here. Next thing, like I said, this is not a true Wharncliffe knife. It is mostly a Warney, right? But there is that area where if you, the blade is sticking up there, that can be a little bit more complicated when sharpening. It's not a major issue, but it is something you want to keep in mind. If you're looking for a true Wharncliffe with a flat edge, that is not what we have going on here. Next thing, this little copper inlay. Now, I got to be honest with you, I think it's just purely aesthetic, but the thing is, it ends up feeling a little bit lazy because if we zoom in a little bit here, you can see here on this side, the copper inlay is sticking out just a little bit. On this side, the copper inlay is sticking out substantially more. There is no, as near as I can tell, reason for that to be a thing really at all. And the fact that it is not flush, the fact that it is kind of sticking up out there, I just don't super get it, right? It ends up looking a little bit sort of lazy or haphazard when it really didn't need to be there to start with. I don't mind the little bit of inlay, right? That's a neat little design touch, but it needs to be done right. It needs to be kept flush to the rest of the blade if you're going to be doing something like that. Next thing, ergonomics are a little weird here. They're not bad, strictly speaking, but they're just very strange because the clip is relatively high and the knife is relatively narrow in the hand. And so in my relatively small hands, although I do get a full 4-finger grip here, it feels a little bit strange because the knife almost wants to rotate a little bit. The grip is almost, try and show it from this direction, almost a little bit cylindrical here. And so as a result, you don't have a lot of that. It gets a lot better if I actually choke up a little bit and put my index finger up on this ramp, but then again, this is something that is, well, maybe this would be easier with bigger hands, but it just feels like my finger's kind of way out there. So ergonomically speaking, I'm sure, and you can also do like a pinch grip or something like that, but I haven't found the position in which this knife is really, it fits really well. This feels like it's designed a little bit more for the eye than for the hand. It is worth noting, though, that there is a very good balance here. This is fitting just about where you'd want it if you are holding it in this kind of a grip here. So there is that. And then finally, on the bad side, this guy is not centered. What we see here is that even before the disassembly, the blade is not centered. It's favoring the show side. There was nothing I could do during the disassembly to fix that. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. That is definitely a shame, and it is, well, let's put it this way. $179 ain't that much money, but at the same time, it's enough money that you should be getting that right. So, to me, all of that is the bad, is that it is not centered. It is, the ergos are a little bit weird. Not terrible, but a little weird. The copper inlay is not flush. The warney is not a true warney. It's relatively thick. It's not super lightweight, and the lanyard hole is not super attractive. On the ugly front, the copper thing, I'll be honest, that bothers me a fair bit, but I also acknowledge it to have zero functional bearing on the knife, so it would be a little weird for me to call it ugly. So I'll just say, I don't care for it, but there's nothing really ugly here. Final conclusion, this is kind of a weird knife, and I say that, by the way, with some appreciation, right? The last thing the world needs right now is more generic pocket knives. There are so many knives out there in the world, oh my god, that having something a little strange, a little weird, is a beautiful thing. And so when you get something like this, it does have some good. It has a nice clip, a nice blade, it's got good contouring on the handle here, a relatively unusual look, a fine action, a solid price, and a flipper design that I think is interesting and doesn't have a lot of the downsides of some of your more conventional flipper designs that can be great. I think the lanyard hole is a little lazy. It's a little thick, a little heavy. It's not actually a flat warney for sharpening purposes. The copper inlay is also a little bit underdone. The ergos are a bit weird, and it is not centered. Ultimately, I feel like this is going to be one of those reviews where you already know whether you're interested or not, right? I mean, let's be real here. A lot of people watch reviews just to get justification of things they already bought, but at the same time, even still, this is going to be one of those where you know the answer, because if this design isn't speaking to you, then honestly, I don't know that there's that much reason to go here, right? It's a fine little knife. If somebody hands it to you, you'll enjoy it. It'll work pretty well, but it's not doing anything functionally different enough to really jump off the table, so to speak, if you don't have a main interest in the design here. And although, for me, the design is fine, it's interesting, but it's also not blowing me away, I don't think it's going to stick around. But that said, if you are loving the design, if you're loving that flipper tab idea, you don't mind some of those little quirks, then I think the price on this guy is going to feel right, and I think you might end up finding this guy to be, well, a little bit foxy. The Vulpex design might have more than 9 tales to tell in your life. Okay, anyways, hope this has been interesting to you and that you have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.